Good morning, pastors and preachers, and everyone who is on stage speaking. I wanted to do a series on how to preach, and consider this video maybe just sort of the first episode in kind of the series I'm going to do on how to preach. Now, of course, I'm not an expert by any means when it comes to preaching. However, I do think that I've learned some lessons that maybe you can also learn from, and you don't have to learn them the hard way. So today I want to spend some time talking about the equipment that I use. Now, of course, all these series will not be in the order of the importance, but I think this is sort of a big thing that a lot of times we ignore. And because I've ignored it for quite some time, I had some pretty major embarrassing moments on stage. For example, one time I got on stage and the adapter for my transmitter kept on coming loose, and the audience, all they heard was just popping noise, and it's just not a good situation for anyone. It's kind of awkward. So don't be like me. Try to do your research and know your equipment before you get up there. And I want to first start with something that you guys probably have seen. Of course, when it comes to microphones, you've seen a lot of different kinds. For the most part, if you are in a small venue or if you're on a mission trip, you'll have a microphone that has a cord. Those are probably my least favorite microphones to preach with, just because you are sort of tied to, the cord, and a lot of times you can trip on it. A lot of times you can just kind of try to pull on it, and the cord there's not enough slack for you to move about the stage. So generally we don't use them, although at times you might have to use one just because how the venue is set up. This is my next, I would say, a step up, an upgrade from microphones when it comes to preaching. That's obviously the wireless microphone. We use a couple different brands. My favorite brand of all time is Sennheiser. This one happens to be a Shure. So we use Sennheisers and Shures a lot just because they're reliable. And a few things people should know about this. Now, of course, a lot of this stuff might sound very basic to you, especially if you've been preaching for a long time. But I'm amazed to see how many people don't know this stuff, and then you pay the consequences of not knowing this. For example, with the wireless microphones, you should never hold them on the antenna. This is the antenna right here. And you should never hold it like this, just because that will interrupt the connection. And then either going to have a drop in sound, or you're going to have a distorted sound. So the first lesson to using these is don't grab the antenna. The second one is make sure that your batteries are charged. I use wireless microphones a lot, and one thing that can go wrong is obviously your batteries dying. So this is why I would recommend that you buy batteries that are rechargeable. And the reason for that, it's kind of a mind trick for me, but when you have rechargeable batteries, you know that every single time you get up there, you charge them fully. So you have a full battery when you get up there. If you buy batteries and you install them, you might be at a half a battery full or a quarter of a battery full, and there's always a possibility of that battery draining faster than you anticipated, and then your battery dies, and then you have to have the sound guy get on stage and change your batteries while everyone is awkwardly looking at you and you're standing there. So I recommend that you get batteries that are rechargeables, and you charge them every single time. Now, of course, most of the stuff is going to be done by the sound guy, but if you are in a small church, you know that the pastor can be pretty much the sound guy and the pastor and everyone, so a lot of times you have to do your own homework, your own equipment. So get rechargeable batteries. And then the last thing that you should do if you use one of these is make sure that when you get up there, it's this microphone is on. For the most part, not all of them, but for the most part, you will have some kind of a button that turns on the microphone. We use the ones that it has a slider. just because it's easier to figure out if it's on or not. So once this slider, you slide it up and the information comes on this little screen right here. You know the microphone is on, and if the microphone still doesn't work, most likely it's because it's of this, the sound guy in the back has not turned your microphone on yet. Those are kind of the three things you should know about this. Don't cover the antenna. Make sure it's always charged full. And the last one, make sure it's on before you get up there. Now, when I say before you get up there, you should be pretty close to whatever you're going to speak when you turn this on. You should not turn this on when you're in front of a speaker, for example, because you might have feedback issues. So I always turn it on just about when I bring it up, and so I'll just do a quick glance at it, make sure it's the screen is on, and then I know, okay, then I can speak now. A lot of people do this when they get up there. They start tapping it. From what I'm told from the sound guys, that's a very big no-no. Do not tap it. Just softly start speaking into it, and then you'll realize pretty quickly that either you're on, or your microphone's not on. So I encourage you guys that if you use this, get to know it, because you might have some, embarrassing moments on stage where your battery dies, or you cover your antenna, or it's not on, and then you go up there and you're like, is this on? On? Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Test, test. And it's just odd and weird. But if you know your equipment and you know how to use this, you'll minimize the chances of that happening. So that's one of my favorite ways of preaching, but it's not I would say the most favorite ways of preaching, just because the problem with having a handheld mic is that obviously you have to hold it with one hand, so it frees only one of your hands, not both of your hands. So it's not my favorite, just because I like to have both of my hands free and I can communicate with my hands. So the next kind of microphone that kind of some people use, but it's also a good microphone, but it's not a great microphone, is what people know as the lav mic. The lav mic, basically, it's a wire with a tiny microphone, and it plugs into your transmitter. So you have a transmitter on your belt, and then some people use this. I don't think this is a great way of using it live. These are great for interviews and videos. They're not great for live, and I'll explain why. They usually go on here, and obviously the reason why people love it is because it's very discreet, and you don't really see it as much. But what I found out with them is you get on stage, and if you turn your head this way or this way, the sound will drop. The sound level will drop. And because of that, because you're not following, your mouth with your microphone, you'll have these changes in sound. So I don't like that. One. Second thing, because it's farther away from your mouth, there's also this, chance of introducing more feedback in the system and noise. So not my favorite, but sometimes if I don't have a wireless handheld or a headset mic, I'll use one of these, even though I don't really love it. But for movie work, for videos, for sit-down interviews, this is a great mic. But when I preach, I'm kind of all over the place, and lav mics are not my favorite. And we're going to move on now to my favorite way of preaching, and that is the headset mic. Now, headset mics comes in, I would say, obviously a lot of different ways of doing this, but one of the ways of using a headset is one that goes only on one ear. Now, I've spent some time researching this, and I've had at least 4 different kinds. I've had the one that is on both ears. I've had the one only on one ear. I do prefer the one ear, but there's obviously some drawbacks with the one ear. The one ear, if it's a very loose one, every single time you turn, the microphone will sort of follow your face. So I found this great company called Sennheld, I think it's called. And what I love about them is they make these one ear, but it really stays on your head. So if I put it on, it just really goes with, with your face and with your head. So it's not, loose. Because the idea of the two ear headset is that it really stays on your head. The drawback with the 2-1 is that I found out a lot of times when I'm rushing on stage, you have to adjust it and pull on tabs, and not my favorite. Even though it really stays on your head, you have to sort of try to adjust it before you go up there. And I'm sure there's easier ways of doing it, but I found that it's kind of a lot of work trying to make it, getting ready for getting on stage. So this is my favorite way, and this one was like $100. No, the 4 microphones that I bought at different times, one of them was like $36. One of them was like $250. One of them, this one's like $100 something. And then the one that I got that was very expensive was by a company called DPA, which is a great microphone. And it was $800, I think. But the problem that I found out really quickly is they had these very expensive adapters, and then they would go bad, and you'd spend like $100 for the adapter, and then after a month of using it, you get on stage and you'd start to pop, and it was just embarrassing because one time I literally had to take it off. I had to even though it was an expensive microphone, it's like $800. I was so frustrated I just pulled it off the ear, and I just stuffed it, and then I grabbed a handheld mic because you're trying to say something and it'll pop, and then the sound will go out, and then the audience is just kind of sitting there like, what the heck is going on? So that was just a really bad experience that from that point on, I never bought any of DPA products anymore, just because you have this great microphone, because it sounded great. But then the weak point was in this adapter that goes into your transmitter, and they would just fail. And, I'm sure they fixed it by now, but I've just sort of decided not to ever buy products from them, even though, again, it's a great, great microphone. But that little thing, once that happens to you on stage, I don't know, it takes you a while to recover from that. So, the next thing, so again, this is probably my favorite way of preaching, just because it stays on your head. It moves with your head, so every single time you move, you have the same consistent sound. And here's a point that I want to mention. With handhelds, a lot of times your hand will get a little bit tired, so you'll start to sort of drift down. And the sound guy has to compensate for that, and so he has to be on the levels at all times because you're doing this. A way I found out to sort of mitigate for that is I hold it on my chin, but that's kind of gross for people, so I don't know if that will work for you. But with the headset is they always stay the same distance, usually about 2 or 3 fingers from my mouth. And once I set it on there, I forget that's even on, and I just focus on preaching, not on, hey, how close do I have to hold the microphone? So that's why it's one of my favorite ways. The other thing is you obviously can, use your hands because you don't have to worry about holding microphone. And the next thing is obviously you have to get a good transmitter. Now, most of the sound systems in your church will have a wireless transmitter, but I recommend you get your own and learn how to use it. I know it might sound a little bit complicated at the beginning, but I strongly recommend you do learn it, because when I have my own system, I know if it's charged or not. I know what I was setting, how sensitive I set the kind of the settings on the transmitter. And also, this one has a mute button. So what I'll do is I'll put it on and I'll have it on mute. And only when I get to the place where I'm supposed to preach, I'll turn it on. And then you turn it on. Now, what I used to do before, because I podcast my sermons, I'll put a link actually to the sermon podcast below so you can kind of gauge the audio and see if you want to see how well it does. Pretty much all those sermons are recorded using this setup. So what I used to do before, I used to have, well, I still have it, a recorder. This is made by Tascam. They don't sell them in the US. I got this one from UK, I think. And the kind of like the amazing thing about this is it looks exactly like a body pack for like a transmitter. And I would feed the microphone first into the recorder, so I have a strong connection into the recorder, and then out of the recorder, out of the output, I would go into the transmitter, and then the transmitter would go to the board. So it would look something like this. So the microphone, the headset microphone, would go into the in of the recorder, and then the out of this would go into my transmitter. So, this is what I would have on my belt. And as you can see, it's a great way because you can have, your microphone go into your recorder. So you have a nice strong connection because it's wired into your recorder. The recorder will record the sermon on here, but then you would transmit this to the board. So I would do two things at once. I would record the sermon, and the second thing is I would send the signal to the board, and then they can just do whatever they want to do with it to sort of amplify it for the audience. I no longer do that because I learned how to trust the wireless Sennheiser G4, where now I have this recorder on the receiving end. So I don't have to have this on my belt. It's actually in the sound booth. So the way that looks is I feed the microphone straight into the transmitter. So this is the transmitter. So all I have on me is the microphone and the body pack that goes on here. And then on the receiving end, I will have the same thing that I just showed you, but in reverse, where the receiver would get the signal, and then the signal will go into the input of the transmitter, and then the transmitter goes into the soundboard. And again, the reason for that is that I learned how to trust the wireless, and I never had issues where it never really dropped signal. So it works just as well, even though the signal is now sent through the air before it gets recorded. So I found out that this works, and that just keeps me from having one more body pack on my belt. So yeah, I really hope this helps you guys. I know that as a pastor, a lot of times you have to use a microphone, but you also would like the podcast. This system gives me a way to have this recorder in the system where I just take this home and I plug it in my computer, get the recording out, and I have the whole sermon there. I edit it and I upload it to the podcast. So that's kind of like how I do it. I strongly recommend that you guys don't go for the cheap wireless systems. Go for the Sennheiser ones, just because this is the 4th generation, and they're very well designed and they're very reliable. On that note, though, I tried their digital system and it did not work for me. So the digital one, they have now the 2.4 gigahertz, I think, digital ones. I would not recommend it. Again, maybe I was doing something wrong, but these ones, the G4s, love them. And I had the G3, and then I upgraded to G4s, and I use them for pretty much anything. Strongly recommend them. And one thing that I really love about these is that you can set the sensitivity. So if your microphone, because these microphones, depends which one you're gonna get, they're gonna be differently sensitive. So some of them are very sensitive, some of them are not as sensitive. So being able to control the sensitivity from your transmitter, it really helps out. It also helps the sound guy. A lot of times when we do sound check, he'll say, "Hey, can you turn down your mic?" And I can use the wireless, transmitter to turn down my microphone sensitivity. So yeah, I hope this helps you guys kind of come up with your own system. But on that note, I want to say that you're preaching so much more than sound. Now, of course, what I mean by sound is your sound system. Your preaching is so much more than knowing equipment. But I do know that if you know how to use the equipment in a way that it's very, there's no problems in it, then this will really, really help you, because there's nothing to sort of hinder you from declaring the message that God has, put on your heart. When I was in university, my professors would always say that, Slavik, no matter what you do, if you are writing an essay or if you are preaching, you are taking people from, one place or destination A to destination B, and you want to make that road as less bumpy as possible. So equipment that works well, it just helps us communicate and not hinder us. But if you have a microphone that is either, gives you a lot of feedback, or it's not charged properly, or the audience is going to notice that. So I strongly suggest that you guys learn how to do your own sound and what microphones you should use. Also, if you have a microphone that's on your head, you have your your hands free, so you're able to communicate with your hands. And if you need to drink water, or if you need to open up your Bible, you're able to do that. So I'm going to go ahead and post all the description, all the links in the description. If you guys have any questions, go ahead and ask them below, and I'll try to make videos to answer those questions, where I'll just go ahead and answer them in the comment section below. Love if you guys can subscribe to this channel. Again, this is not in the order of importance. This is more like I'm doing this first episode just to talk about the equipment, and then the next episodes will be on stage presence and preparing for a sermon. So I really hope that this helps you guys, and that this makes you a better communicator. God bless, and take care.